I've been writing and arranging music for handbell choirs since the mid-1990s. Now, like a lot of handbell composers and arrangers, most of the handbell music I've written has been sacred in nature. Hymn arrangements, Christmas carols, that sort of thing, as well as original compositions. But starting around 2008-2009, as I became more involved with school and community handbell choirs, I also began writing handbell arrangements of rock, pop, and jazz music. I've gone on to write several dozen handbell arrangements in these genres, and a number of them have found their way into publication. I've found that there are some unique characteristics and unique challenges to writing arrangements of handbell music in this style, and I want to talk a little bit about my process, my approach to writing these kinds of arrangements, and maybe along the way inspire a few of you to try writing some arrangements of your own. To get ourselves into the right mindset, let's start by reviewing some of the basic instruments that you find in a typical rock band. The foundation of most rock and jazz ensembles is what's called a rhythm section. A rhythm section includes some basic components. Usually you have a drum set, which is a collection of small drums and cymbals that a performer uses to create different rhythms. You'll have a bass, which plays the bass notes or the low notes. This could be an acoustic or upright bass. This could be an electric bass. And you'll also have one or more chord-playing instruments, instruments that play chords. This could be a piano or a keyboard, or it could be one or more acoustic or electric guitars. And the rhythm section backs up or accompanies the lead singer. Now, of course, there are lots of rock bands out there that include instruments beyond this basic collection that you find in the rhythm section. And for the last several decades, most rock and pop music includes some electronic components, either in addition to or in place of some of these instruments in the rhythm section. But even in rock music today, pop music today, you'll usually find these same basic categories of sounds. You'll have some sort of drums, some sort of bass, some sort of chords backing up one or more singers. Of course, the way that you play these instruments is very different than the way that we play handbells. But while we may not be able to imitate the exact sound of these instruments on our bells, there are things that we can do to capture the same style. The first thing you'll need to do before writing an arrangement of a rock, pop, or jazz song is to get permission from the copyright holder, and that's true even if you're just writing the arrangement for your own uses. I'll talk a little bit at the end of this video about the process of getting permission to arrange. Once you've secured permission, there are a couple of ways of getting started. I know some arrangers who like to begin by purchasing a piano arrangement of the song in question, if there's one available, and using that as a starting point and as a reference while they're putting together the handbell version. Personally, I like to work as much as possible from the original recordings. Now, if you've never transcribed a song from a recording, the first time you do it, it's going to be a long and arduous process. But it's an amazing way to train your ear. And like with anything else, the more that you do it, the faster and easier it will become. Unfortunately, due to copyright rules, I can't easily use a recording of an actual rock or pop song as an example in this video. So instead, I've put together my own rock-style recording of a public domain hymn tune, Joyful, Joyful, We Adore Thee, based of course on Beethoven's Ode to Joy, to use for demonstration purposes. Let's take a listen. If you were listening to the instruments in that recording, you might have heard the drums, the bass, an electric piano sound playing chords, and an electric guitar playing a solo lead line in addition to the vocals. Now let's take a look at how we could take each of those different musical elements and adapt them for handbells. One of the first things I'll usually do is to figure out the chord progression for the song by playing chords on the piano and trying to match them up with the recording. Of course, if you have piano music or a lead sheet for the song, the chords will usually be indicated on there. Here I've gotten a start on the sheet music with the chords indicated above the appropriate measures. Now we can start incorporating the other instruments from the recording. And one of the advantages of using my own recording is that I can easily separate out the audio tracks for each of the separate instruments so that we can listen to them individually. Let's start off with the drum part. Now, obviously, we can't easily imitate the sound of the unpitched drums of the drum set with our pitched handbells, But one of the main characteristics of most drum beats is this constant driving eighth note pattern. Doomt, kat, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And we can imitate that with the bells by using bells malleted on the table. Here you can see I've filled in the notes of each of the chords, the D chord, the G chord, and so forth, with eighth notes malleted on the table. And this is a pretty common approach when arranging a rock song for handbells. Oh, and I'm not going to worry too much for now about that D5 that ended up in the bass clef, because there's a pretty good chance we're going to be transposing this later on anyhow. Next, let's listen to the bass part. In most rock songs, the bass plays single notes on the root of each chord. So when there's a D chord, they play a D. When there's a G chord, they play a G, and so on. You might have noticed the rhythm that's used by the bass in this song. 1, 2, and 3, 4, 1, 2, and 3, 4. So we can incorporate that rhythm into our low notes, still using mallets on the table. You might notice that I've made some adjustments to the G4 and the A4 bells in a few places so that the 3-octave choirs are still playing that rhythm in their lowest notes. Next, we'll look at the electric piano part. This part's a little bit more complex. Now there's a lot going on there, but I'm going to try to simplify that rhythm down a bit to its essentials. 1 and a 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and a 2 and 3 and 4. And since it's a fairly percussive and staccato sound, I'm going to use martellatos and martellato lifts to try to capture that same style. And that's actually a good lesson to learn in all this too. It's tempting to want to get every little nuance of every single note that's used everywhere in the song into your handbell arrangement. And when you do that, you usually end up with a big level 6 mess that's almost completely unplayable. Sometimes it's important to know where to simplify and what parts to leave out in your arrangement. You might notice as I go along that I'm isolating different musical elements into different ranges of the bells, for simplicity of notation as much as anything else. Next, let's isolate our vocal track. Joyful, joyful, we adore thee, God of glory, Lord of love. The vocal part includes the familiar Ode to Joy melody as well as a high harmony part. Now, just because of the way that this is laying in the bell range, I'm actually going to put the harmony part below the melody. As long as it's in there somewhere, you'll still get a sense of it. You might have noticed with the electric piano part, I wasn't too concerned about the inversions of the chords or which notes of the chords I was using, as long as I had that rhythm incorporated. That's the most important thing. Finally, let's listen to our screaming electric guitar solo. That part's pretty simple, really just a few notes. Let's put those in over the top of our vocal melody. That adds a third layer of rhythm to our treble clef, which starts to get a little bit notationally messy, but sometimes it can't be avoided. I did shorten some of the notes so that I could leave out some of the ties just to clean up the look of the notation a little bit and make it easier to read. Since we want that part to sound distinct from our vocal line, let's actually change those to chime note heads. And at this point, we've got all of the elements of our original recording incorporated in some way into our handbell arrangement. I'm going to play the original recording again so that you can listen for how all of those individual musical elements are represented in the handbell score. Joyful, joyful, we adore thee, God of glory, Lord of love. Now you've probably already noticed that we have a little bit of a range problem going on. Our lowest note is a D3 and our highest note is a D7. If you're playing with a 5-octave choir, of course that works fine. But if you're also wanting this to be workable by a 3-octave choir, we need to do something about that D7. If we were to transpose the whole arrangement down a whole step, from D major to C major, now our D7 becomes a C7, fits within the upper limit of the 3-octave range. Our D3 becomes a C3, we're still good within our lower 5-octave range, and this arrangement will work for 3, 4, or 5 octaves. Now, of course, everything works out nice and cleanly in this artificial example that I put together for teaching purposes. It won't always work quite that cleanly with any random rock song. Sometimes you have to experiment a little bit to figure out which key is going to work best within the handbell range, but the principle is the same. Finally, thanks to the magic of MIDI, Let's listen to what this arrangement might sound like on actual bells. So there we have it. Of course, every rock song is different. Some are going to adapt more easily to bells than others, and every song is going to have its own unique challenges in adapting to performance on a very different type of instrument. But I hope this has given you an overview of one possible approach to the process of arranging a rock, pop, or jazz song for handbell choir. I want to touch just briefly on the process of securing what's called permission to arrange, which is an important step anytime you're writing an arrangement of a pop or rock song or any piece of music that's still under copyright. The first thing you need to do is figure out which company owns the copyright for the song. If you have a piano or a choral arrangement of the song, you can look on the first page, or often I'll just go to an online sheet music vendor where they'll frequently have the first couple of pages available as a sample for preview. And if you look at the bottom of the first page, it'll say something like Copyright XYZ Music Company. Next, you need to figure out who administers the print music rights for that music company. In my experience, the vast majority of rock and pop songs are administered by one of two companies, either Hal Leonard or Alfred Publishing. So you can go to halleonard.com and alfred.com and search for a list of imprints that they administer. Once you figure out which company it is, both websites have a link for licensing where you can fill out an online form, and you'll typically be charged a fee, usually in the range of about $25 to $50. This is an important step to take, partly to respect copyright law, but also because this is how songwriters and composers make their living. If you have any questions about the copyright permissions process, feel free to contact me. I hope I've been able to demystify, at least a little bit, the process of adapting a rock, pop, or jazz song for handbells. If you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with me. You can find my contact information at my website, ronmallorymusic.com. Thanks for listening, and God bless.